From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Bursell. We've got to talk about something today. I'm going to do a little thinking out loud, and maybe you can help me through this. Here's my concern. There seems to be a growing overlap between two camps. One camp is the one that we're always complaining about around here. Right-wing, fascist, neo-Nazis, growing strength in America. The other camp is the so-called free thinker, especially in the realm of what you'd call New Agers. The whole New Age thing, alternative medicine, dabbling in the occult, spiritualism. It was a thing, well, it's always been a thing. It goes back to ancient times. It had kind of its heyday in the 70s. Well, I've been really concerned lately about the very fat middle part of this Venn diagram. We've got Nazi hippies, and it looks like they're becoming a really large cohort. When I was first starting in radio, one of my first commentaries was about this. But I thought it was just kind of a weird little observation I was making. I never dreamed it would reach these lengths. This was, I don't know, maybe late 80s, early 90s. I was living in California, and there's a pretty large population out there. You know how the cliche is a little bit true. Things start on the coasts and work their way through the country. And the cliche about California being filled with sort of flakes there's some truth to that. That cliche doesn't come from nowhere. In my particular circle, there were lots of New Agey type people. I spent some time in Marin County, which is just north of the San Francisco Bay. It's on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was a real kind of hotbed for New Age types. And they seemed, for the most part, really harmless. I didn't really buy into all of it, but they were kind of part of the gang. If we take this back historically to the real heyday of the 60s and the hippie movement, it was anti-establishment. It was about being a free thinker. It was about not bowing to authority. But it was never, at least in my understanding, maybe I was wrong from the beginning, it was never anti-intellectual. A lot of the best hippies, went to college. And they changed the landscape of the university, the whole free speech movement. They protested the war. It was generally thought, I think by most people, certainly by me, that if you were anti-establishment, that sort of put you on the left of the political spectrum. It was, we all got to love each other. We got to stop war. We got to stop money. We got to stop hating each other. It was love and peace, man. Well, as this morphed into the 70s and then 80s, and then this time frame I'm talking about when I was in the Bay Area, 80s, early 90s, it really took on this very strident individualism. And then it was all about, in addition to your horoscope and crystals and natural healing and all of that, it took on a very individualistic and materialistic identity. I first really noticed it in a church where I worked a couple times as a singer. So I knew these people. And it was a New Age kind of church. It was about affirmations and manifesting your best life. But these people would make their, you make your affirmation poster. You clip pictures out of magazines of things you want to achieve in your life, and then you affirm that and you chant and, you manifest that into the world, that whole line of thinking, right? Well, I noticed there was a lot of large houses and expensive cars and extravagant vacations that these people were trying to manifest into their lives. At the same time, there was a notion that, again, has grown over the years. So it's very prevalent today, but this is the first time I noticed it, that your thoughts create your reality. This whole separation from any sort of communal effort. It was all about your spirit and your thoughts, and you're going to bring your best life into the world. That's really all you can do, all you should do. That's your mission in life, to be as happy and as comfortable as possible. And what they were preaching is that everybody needed to do this, and if they did, then it would be a better world. There was almost no talk that I could find, none, about doing the hard work required to help each other, to help other people, to build a community. It was all about this inner spiritual work. And I thought, wait a minute. You're aligning yourself with the right wing. In the great debate between individualism and collectivism, which has been with us forever, and especially since the founding of the nation, when the writers of the Constitution wrote this delicate balance between individual rights and collective responsibility. These now late 80s, early 90s New Agers were firmly in the camp of the individualists. They were locking arms, wittingly or unwittingly, with the right wing, with conservatives, which seemed to me totally antithetical to where they should have been. And so, as I say, in my very early days of radio, one of the first commentaries I made was about this. But I thought I was just being kind of clever. Oh, look what I noticed. I never for a minute did I dream it would devolve into our current state. Because now I see examples everywhere I turn. This twisted notion of freedom that seems to ignore any notion of the collective. You know, we used to equate hippies with the commune. Hippies were lefties. Now, most hippies I know, kind of the neo-hippies of today, they're right-wing fascists. It's all about individual freedom, and everybody else can just go suck it. If you don't have the same kind of spiritual enlightenment I have, well, then there's nothing I can do for you, because it's just all about me and my inner journey. There's no humility left. There seems to be zero empathy in this new 21st century Nazi hippie. Talk about empathy. There's a new age way of thinking out there that if someone is struggling, and that's anybody, this comes from Deepak Chopra and this whole kind of line of thinking, where your thoughts manifest the world. The idea is that if anybody is suffering, it's pretty much their own fault. They just somehow deserve it because of karma, because of a past life, because they're not spiritually evolved. You'll say, well, what about the Afghan refugee, the 5-year-old kid? Well, at some point in a past life, they lived in such a way that they needed to learn this lesson. And so anybody who's suffering now is just learning a spiritual lesson. What could possibly be less empathetic about that? So empathy is gone. Basic human decency, caring is gone. Because if you believe that we're all spiritual beings, and if you believe in karma, and if you believe that your thoughts manifest the reality of the world, and you take this all quite literally, if you become a fundamentalist, new spiritualist, well then you're basically a radical individualist. And you're telling people who suffer, people who are poor, people who are oppressed, little children who are victims of war, that's just your spiritual journey. I'm hearing this from people. I'm seeing social media posts from these new Nazi hippies. The hippies and the New Agers used to be all about nonviolence. Now there seems to be, whatever. It just is what it is. I'll take care of my own little corner, my own little spiritual corner. used to be about living simply, living off the land. I mean, the ideal, right, was get a farm with a bunch of your hippie friends, have a little commune out in the country. No, now you're manifesting like the people in the church I was talking about. You're manifesting for a Lamborghini and a big McMansion out in the suburbs. Because now money, the whole attitude about money is, well, if you're living right, if you're living spiritually, you will be rewarded, which is pretty much exactly the same thing that the radical right-wing fundamentalist Christians, the evangelical types, the preacher guys. If you give some of your money to my megachurch, you will be rewarded with riches. God wants you to be rich. It's this whole bounty kind of philosophy. The right wing and the new agey, which I thought was left wing, but obviously it's not, the thinking absolutely merges here. It's the exact same attitude. If you're right with your spirituality, or your right-wing, white-haired God and Jesus on the cross, or left-wing goddess or whatever your crystal or whatever you're worshiping, if you're right with your worship, you will be rewarded in this life with the car and the mansion. So they've totally come together on money. The social issues, racism, sexism, homophobia, the things we fight. No. You just got to sit up on a rock somewhere and meditate or pray and create a paradigm shift in the universe, and somehow this kind of magical thinking will cure everything. And it completely relieves them of the responsibility to do the work. So it's anti-intellectual, it's pro-money, it's neutral on violence and all the different forms of oppression. We did a show recently about how the pollsters tell us that most Americans have the right idea. Generally. They're left to center left. They want justice for everyone. They want Medicare for all. They want gun safety laws. You and I have talked about this a lot. So I'm not suggesting that these people are taking over America. But I am suggesting they're a pretty large cohort that I have only recently come to appreciate, as in appreciate the danger that they present. And there's a very dangerous sort of tipping point. It's like you're on the fence and you can fall off either way. Let me quote Noam Chomsky, a hero, a lion of the left. This is a Noam Chomsky quote. "The whole educational and professional training system is a very elaborate filter which just weeds out people who are too independent and who think for themselves and who don't know how to be submissive and so on, because they're dysfunctional to the institutions." Noam Chomsky. Now, an old-time lefty, which I confess to be, can read that and think, yeah, there are institutions, and they are steeped in old ways. They're steeped in money. They're steeped in the patriarchy, in white supremacy. So my lefty reading of that quote is, yes, we have to resist the institutions. But you can see how a new ager, a new Nazi hippie, can read that same quote and think, oh, well, they're on the right side. I'm going to distrust all institutions now, which means I don't believe so-called experts. I don't believe scientists and doctors and researchers who've told us very clearly what the latest pandemic is all about and how masks and vaccines will solve the problem. No, because they're just institutions trying to brainwash me. I'm independent. I think for myself. I'm not going to be submissive to these dysfunctional institutions. So, the very same words from a lion of the left, Noam Chomsky, can be read two different ways. And far too many people are taking the Nazi hippie path. I saw a post in my social media recently from a friend. She's very much of an independent thinker, and she's kind of a, alternative medicine. She's one of these people. But she always seemed to me like an intelligent person. I bring up this post from this friend because the source was Mercola, MERCOLA.com, founded by a guy named Joseph Mercola. He's a physician. He pushes dietary supplements and medical devices. And he's basically a con artist. He has butted heads with every institution you can name. The Food and Drug Administration, the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. He's been labeled as a quack by virtually everybody, which of course then makes him a hero to this crowd. If the entire world of science and research and medicine has reached a consensus about something, sorry, but your opinion isn't worth shit. So I was really surprised when I saw my friend share his post. I was curious about this, and so I searched for a couple of articles, and up they came. One headline, and I guess this is where I got I didn't realize this is where I got the term, Nazi Hippies, When the New Age and Far Right Overlap. Article by Jules Evans, noting this overlap between New Agers and far right groups becoming more predominant. Some people are astonished that New Age hippies have any overlap with extremist conspiracy politics, but it happens, the writer points out, and notes the rich history of this, specifically, Nazi Germany of the 20s and 30s. The Nazi movement was very much in bed with things like astrology, with dowsing and divining, something called ley lines, which I hadn't heard of. Himmler's SS conducted extensive research into subterranean geomantic energies and something called ley lines. Alternative medicine. Hitler, Hess, Himmler, and many other leading Nazis were into alternative medicine, organic and vegetarian diets, homeopathy, anti-vaxxing, and natural healing. Now, I want to remind you once again, there's lots of good to be culled from these disciplines. Alternative medicine, organic and vegetarian diets, of course. But it's just further proof that it is no longer, as I thought, the province of the left. It is very comfortable in the right-wing, fascist, anti-intellectualist camp. Parapsychology, the first ever institute devoted to parapsychology research, was set up under the Nazis. The idea of wholeness, holism, of course, holistic was a buzzword for many years and still is. The Nazis were fascinated by holism, by the idea of wholeness for the individual and for society, as a way of healing the divisions caused by rationalism, materialism, industrialism, and military defeat. This quest for wholeness led them to a sort of early environmental holism. They passed legislation to protect forests and rivers and moved to ban experiments on animals. Of course, they authorized experiments on prisoners, on human prisoners. This is a weird Venn diagram. But just talk to your friends. Look at your social feed. I bet you're going to see examples of this. Things we once thought of as forward thinking, as kind of lefty and progressive, they just fit so nicely into a right-wing fascism. Greens today, who think all we need to save the world is a so-called paradigm shift, I mentioned this earlier, to an ecocentric worldview, should realize you can hold such a view and also be a fascist. Yeah, this gets back to what I was saying earlier. It's not about doing the actual work of organizing, of making collective decisions through a rigorous democratic debate. All of those things are not welcome in the hippie Nazi movement. No, it's a paradigm shift, just through magical thinking. Here's some Nazi literature. Ernst Lehmann, a Nazi professor of botany. We recognize that separating humanity from nature, from the whole of life, leads to humankind's own destruction and to the death of nations. Only through a reintegration of humanity into the whole of nature can our people be made stronger. This striving toward connectedness with the totality of life, with nature itself, a nature into which we are born. So you extract that quote and just take it out of its context, put it up on a poster. It sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But this is completely compatible with the Nazi idea of a pure race. Reading again, this eco-biopolitics in which humans are an animal like any other led, in the Nazis' case, to eugenics. The Nazis were into mind-altering drugs, which is another feature of this sort of New Age hippie Nazi I'm talking about. They call it plant medicine. And I'll repeat one more time. I'm not necessarily refuting any positive aspects to these ideas. I'm just pointing out, as is the author of this article, that they're completely compatible with fascism. And as I started this conversation, with individualism, toxic individualism. The Nazi government sponsored research into use of mind-altering drugs to improve soldiers' performance, widespread use of methamphetamine by soldiers to keep morale high, psychedelic research. Hitler and other Nazis were deep into occult theories, even Eastern religions, yoga. Himmler sent an expedition to Tibet to meet the Dalai Lama and explore Tibetan magic. At the time, many saw Hitler as a guru and compared him to a magician, a hypnotist, a medicine man who cast a spell on his listeners to his rally speeches. I have come across people who openly worship the Orange Menace in this way. They are self-described, self-proclaimed New Agers. They're into all of the alternative medicine, natural nutrition, all of it. They're into all of it, and the spiritualism. And these very same people, more than one or two, I've seen them in my social media, singing the praises of the Orange Menace, just as some Germans of the 30s saw Hitler as a guru. These people see the Orange Menace as this great leader that will take us into a new age. How did this happen? It's happening in America. Interesting quote from this article. A German by the name of Kurt Ludecki recalls that after hearing Hitler, he experienced an exaltation that could be likened only to a religious conversion. I mean, look at the MAGA rallies. Look at the deplorables. Like other gurus, Hitler was a malignant narcissist, willing to lead the entire nation to death and destruction rather than back down and admit his magical prophecies were fantasy. Nazis sold the German people a simplistic supernatural fantasy and conspiracy theory in which all their problems were caused by a hidden global elite of monsters, vampires, demons. That is, the Jews. I don't have to point out these obvious parallels, do I? The author does it in the next paragraph. Demonic liberals from Hollywood, the Democratic Party, and the deep state. Those are the present-day monsters, vampires, and demons. You don't have to be a QAnon follower in the deep end. You don't have to be in that tiny slice. This is starting to permeate. So this overlap, this big fat Venn diagram between the New Agers and the very, very dangerous right wing of scapegoating, of magical thinking, of ruthlessness. I never dreamed when I was a kid in the 60s and I saw all these cool hippies running around that it would morph into this. Even when I was making the commentary I alluded to in the late 80s, early 90s, I thought it was just a weird little observation on my part. I never dreamed there would be such a marriage. And now I see it every day. I see it every day in my social media. It turns out that the hippie movement was not exclusively progressive, as many of us thought it was. This is something I learned. I've been shocked and dismayed by this whole thing, but there's no denying it anymore. And it's a tough nut to crack, because there is that one element that I share with the New Agers. Yeah, I'm always, if you know me at all, I'm always critiquing society. I'm critiquing institutions. I'm skeptical of their honesty, of their competence. But it's kind of analogous to the argument I keep making about Bernie. I have been since the 2016 primaries. And that is the overlap I saw between Bernie and the Orange Menace. They were both populists, at least in rhetoric. I mean, for the Orange Menace, it was just all rhetoric. You never knew what to believe and what not to believe. But the point is, what the voters heard was that they're going to shake up the system. The system is broken. As opposed to Hillary Clinton, who was very much a product of the establishment. No, we have a great system. Capitalism works just fine. We just have to do little reforms here and reforms there, and we have the right people in office, and we have to have the right president in the Oval Office. Yeah, Hillary was establishment. Bernie and the Orange Menace were anti-establishment. They shared that. but their programs, their solutions, their way of approaching it couldn't have been more polar opposite. Bernie was about collectivism, about democracy, about all of us doing the work and all of us benefiting through social justice programs. Bernie was about doing the work. And, maybe you think that sounds old-fashioned. Maybe it is. But having some respect for truth, for reason, for programs that work for everyone, as opposed to defining enemies, scapegoating, magical thinking like trickle-down economics, or magical thinking of sitting on a rock in the lotus position and humming your way into a new world. As I've said many times, if that's your thing, fine, do it. But don't think for a second. I don't know. I can't get into a position of trying to convince people, because I know this is falling on deaf ears. People who think that doing the individual spiritual work is all any of us can do and all any of us should do, I don't know how to talk you out of that. I honestly don't. I wish I could. But when you go down that road of magical thinking, you're easily manipulated. And yeah, doing the work and showing your work, the way your math teacher asked you to do back in school, show your work. Give us some reason to believe this is going to make a difference. Give us something that everybody can work on together. Well, I don't know if I've convinced you of anything, but I just wanted to make the observation. All right. Well, thanks for helping me think this through. We got to take this next step. We got to figure out how to move forward. Because there's no way I'm just going to sit back and be a passive observer to this. I got to be a part of it. And I hope you share that sentiment. All right. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.